Is Chinawood the New Hollywood? Contrasting environments between the Chinese and American media spheres. Over the past 2 decades, China has attempted to increase its efforts in producing Chinese films, however, has faced a series of hurdles and challenges due to their strict media policies. On the other hand, while China seems to be lacking in regard to its filmic soft power, the American film industry utilizes globalization effectively to disseminate American cultural products to a wide audience around the world, especially China. This video essay will therefore attempt to investigate in more detail the reasons as to why China is struggling to produce popular films, while America continues to grow its markets overseas. I will begin by analyzing the
Today,
Chinese
China
media
is a
landscape
movie
and
nation
how
with big
Chinese
ambitions to be
ideologies,
reckoned with.
mindsets, and
There's
media
plenty of
policies
money,
can
and many
impact
foreign
their film
directors
industry.
film their movies in China.
A huge issue
In
pointed out by
Hanzhen, not
Hui
far
Qin
from the old
regarding the
Chinese
lack of
film
success
metropolis
in
of
Chinese
Shanghai,
films comes
a
down
Chinese
largely in
Hollywood
part
is
to the
being
lack of
built.
innovation and creation, not only within the Chinese film industry, but the artistic
在蒙古台
and
集演
cultural
完
scene
就可以休息了。
This lack of
基本上
creativity
一天
can
每
be
天都是
argued
这样
to
的。
stem from the traditional and
Refined
conservative
poetry.
Chinese psyche
Chinese
that
literature
heavily
is
takes
counted
on a
among the world.
Confucius ideology. According to Kim in his article exploring the interactions between Asian culture, Confucianism, and creativity, he suggests that though people may have inherent natural differences in their capacity for creativity, it mostly comes down to an individual's interaction with the macrocosm where creative expression is found. Furthermore,
With 3,000
several media
years of
studies show
essays,
that
novels,
an overall focus on the enhancements of domain and creative skills is insufficient in enhancing the overall levels of creativity within a community if the cultural context does not accommodate this sense of creative expression and growth. Upon deeper investigation, I was able to discover the 4 pillars of Confucius' teachings, which are fundamental in constructing an ideology within the Chinese mentality, and this acts as precursors for its strict media politics. The 4 key principles are emphasis on education, family systems, hierarchical relationships, and benevolence. This ideological mindset trickles down to the way that media policies are made within the country as a rigid, lenient, and authoritative system. As stated by Curtin, the PRC film and television institutions are still controlled by the state and therefore constrained by ideological and infrastructural limitations. This is furthered by Hui Qin, who elaborates that the administrative system in place within China does not align with the film practice itself. In China, the film industry is solely run through the state administration of radio, film, and television, and controls largely all of the functions and mechanisms within the film industry, acting as a policymaker, production instructor, content censor, and market supervisor. Therefore, this sense of over-concentration of power makes it difficult for filmmakers and producers to be in charge of their own work, and thus may not be great for the development of the Chinese film industry in the long run. In the book, After Broadcast News, Media Regimes, Democracy, and the New Information, Williams and Deli Carpini refer to the phrase media regime. A media regime determines the gates through which information about culture, politics, and economics passes, thus shaping the discursive environment in which such topics are discussed. While China holds an intensely strict media regime, America, on the other hand, democratizes its media and is heavily impacted by the emergence of modern capitalism, which altered the position of the writer, producer, and thus filmmaker, putting an emphasis on market forces. Therefore, writers and editors created works to a definable public interest, probably leading to the factors as to why the films are so successful economically and culturally. The difference between the 2 media regimes is that in China, films are screened and censored, and created for the purpose of furthering the Chinese national interest, while American Hollywood films do the same things through telling subjective and personable narratives. In the article Controlling the Chinese Media by Hasid, he describes that the Chinese media uses a sense of uncertainty as a control mechanism to oversee their media industry, something he terms as the regime of uncertainty. From 1979 to the early 90s, movies released in China were almost exclusively propaganda films sanctioned by the Chinese Communist Party. As a result, enthusiasm for film dwindled as the annual theater attendance declined by almost 79%. However, in 1994, hoping to revitalize its dying film market and attract higher theater attendance, China imported its first foreign film, The Fugitive, produced by Warner Brothers. The movie grossed nearly $3 million in China and was regarded in the US and Chinese press as an event of historic significance. After the success, Chinese theaters quickly began importing more and more American films, between 6 and 10 being shown in theaters every year in the late 90s. According to a research report by Sean O'Connor and Nicholas Armstrong in 2005, Chinese box office sales have increased alongside China's standard of living, resulting in China surpassing Japan as the world's second largest film market behind the United States in 2012. It is suggested if the global film market continues to grow at this rate, China will eventually surpass the United States as the largest film market within the next 5 years. The main driver of China's film growth is the increased demand from the country's expanding middle class. Growing incomes have led to a surge in consumption, with families spending more on luxury goods, including trips to the movie theater. In response to growing consumer demand, China has embarked on a movie theater construction spree and currently builds an average of 50 new movie screens each day, increasing access for the country's 1.3 billion citizens, and are continuing a rapid rate of construction. Due to this rapid rate of growth, Hollywood relies heavily on China's film market for revenue. However, the processes to get films into China is difficult due to the strict regulation of film imports. China's regulations and processes for approving foreign films reflect the Chinese Communist Party's position that art, including film, is a method of social control. As a result of these regulations, Hollywood filmmakers are required to cut out any scenes, dialogue, and themes that may be perceived as a slight insult to the Chinese government. With an eye toward distribution in China, many American filmmakers increasingly edit their films in anticipation of Chinese censors. Though censorship between the two countries vary largely, it cannot be denied that there is a sense of codependency between the two countries and their film markets. While America needs the Chinese market for revenue, conversely, China needs the expertise and filmic know-how from Hollywood. As China attempts to modernize its domestic film industry from the multiple decade-long period of propaganda films, it is increasingly willing to cooperate with Hollywood. This cooperation is intended in part to bring new cinematic skills into the country. For example, with the film Southpaw, it was co-produced with the Chinese Dalian Wanda Group Corporation. According to the Weinstein Company's former chief operating officer, David Glasser, he stated that the Chinese were, quote, on the set and involved in production, post-production, and marketing because they wanted to learn how we do what we do. Therefore, to support China's burgeoning film industry, the influx of filmmaking know-how is just as important as the box office revenue from imported Hollywood films. As Yu Dong, an executive in Bona Film Group, stated, "Everything we learned from Hollywood." An interesting mechanism to explore here is a subtlety in the way in which American Hollywood systems are slowly infiltrating the way that things are done within the Chinese film industry. As mentioned earlier, all films distributed to China from the States have to be first submitted to the State Administration of Radio, Film, and Television for approval. Then films are subject to rigorous regulations and censors. Therefore, to counteract this, more and more films are being co-produced with the Chinese studios, as these films do not count as foreign films, allowing American filmmakers to bypass the 34 foreign film limit. Creative commitments necessary for obtaining co-production approval can include having at least one scene shot in China, casting at least one Chinese actor, receiving a minimum 1/3 of the movie's total investment from Chinese companies, and in general, illustrating a positive Chinese image. Hollywood studios are also opening offices in China to encourage co-production arrangements to increase their access to China's market. The upcoming Kung Fu Panda 3 is a co-production between DreamWorks Animation, China Film Corporation, and the Shanghai-based Oriental DreamWorks. While the original creative work is originating from the United States, the Shanghai office is overseeing the film's production and animation. Furthermore, the proliferation of American production units in China not only integrates US films into Chinese markets, but also facilitates the exchange of film technologies and skills. For example, in Kung Fu Panda 3, Chinese producers at Oriental DreamWorks learned new animation technologies and studied painting, sculpting, and acting with American counterparts. And these technology transfers are a valuable benefit of joint productions for Chinese filmmakers.
Yes. 你找不到儿子了。是啊。
However, under these co-production agreements, American films are held to difficult regulatory standards. According to China Film Co-Production Company President Zhang Xun, he stated, "We have a huge market and we want to share it with you, but we want films that are heavily invested in Chinese culture, not one or two shots. We want to see positive Chinese images." But the vagueness of Chinese requirements is often difficult for American filmmakers, with no clear vision of what a co-production is or should be. United States and Chinese firms face difficulty aligning their expectations. According to SARFT regulations, all films exported to China must adhere to the principles of the Chinese Constitution and maintain social morality. Therefore, any films depicting crime or any other illicit or illegal actions within Chinese borders as anything that could be perceived as anti-China are prohibited. Though in practice this standard is not uniformly applied, in general, nudity, violence, and inappropriate language are prohibited. However, in some cases that occurred previously, these censorships were bypassed and distributed in China. For example, in the film The Flowers of War, graphically portrayed the Nanking Massacre with scenes depicting overt violent and sexual content. But because the film stoked anti-Japanese sentiments, it passed Chinese censors easily. The SARFT's control over foreign films serves to protect the domestic film industry. For example, they adopt policies to protect Chinese film markets, such as the tactical timing of release of films. For example, import bans are placed during the Lunar New Year celebration and in the summer months when Chinese families frequently visit cinemas. Recently, the release of a number of American films approved for release in China was held off, helping the box office gross of Chinese films like Monster Hunt, which reportedly saw higher sales because of the lack of American competition. The SARFT also gives incentives for films which support government-sanctioned ideals. The production company for a Chinese film titled Full Circle received a bonus of approximately $500,000 from the government because the film promoted filial piety, which is considered as a key virtue in Chinese society, linking to the second pillar of the Confucian ideology mentioned earlier. China views film as a component of social control, and in 2014, a speech by President Xi reaffirmed Mao's belief that Chinese art serves politics, and through strict regulations governing film content, the Communist Party's concerns are positioned above all interests. Due to the limit on foreign films and the size of the market, US filmmakers have significant motivation to work with Chinese regulators, even if they have to remove important scenes or themes from their movies to do so. American filmmakers attempt to entice Chinese moviegoers by including popular Chinese locations, actors, and products in their movies, seeking higher profits for their film's release in China. For example, the film Gravity appealed to Chinese audiences by portraying China's space program in a positive light. The film then went on to gross $71 million in China. These changes helped to court Chinese audiences while not distorting the narrative of the film. Although films made in the US make up a large portion of China's box office revenue, Chinese films are becoming nearly as profitable as their Western counterparts. However, according to Professor Ying Zhu, the recent success of domestic films in China speaks volumes not necessarily about the quality of the films, but about China's market. Though the American domestic film market may be at a point of stagnation, they are on the right track of globalizing the scope of their film industry to foreign markets such as that of China. On the other hand, though China is a great market space for films, they have largely struggled in their distribution approaches to a global market. And as mentioned by Tu, Chinese films can learn from Indian films in Bollywood, which have rich characters and a strong national flavor. To cater for the taste of Western audience, Chinese film producers were too obsessed with achieving higher overseas box office earnings and would like to imitate Hollywood movies in all aspects. This is an indicator of the benefits but also the costs of these co-production agreements, where the Chinese film industry is exchanging a lot of knowledge with the American system. However, the actual development of their own films is still lacking. The imitative films created by Chinese production houses received often and not bad responses from both Western and local audiences. According to Tu, only films with a distinctive national flavor can move an audience. Given that China will soon become the world's largest film market, and as Hollywood becomes more dependent on revenue from the Chinese box office, Hollywood will naturally tailor its products to target Chinese audiences. The steeply rising film budgets, the stagnated US film market, and the opportunities of the Chinese box office leave blockbuster films with only one choice, and that is to enter the Chinese market. Hollywood's efforts to comply with the demands of Chinese officials afford China a disproportionate leverage over the production of American films. Chinese censorships affect not only Chinese audiences, but also film audiences in the US and around the world. Hollywood confronts broad consequences when it does not appease Chinese regulators. The consideration of China's political sensitivities by those producing and controlling American film poses troubling questions about the reach of China's censors and the future of their influence. This leaves us the question, is Chinawood really the new Hollywood? The arguments presented in this video would assume so. The sheer size of its film market is enough to shift the production process of the most influential films in the world, and becoming the key driving force in the global film industry. However, whether or not if it can successfully globalize its national films at the same scale of its American counterpart is yet to be seen.